Hey everyone, my name is Sandy Marshall. We'll go ahead and get started. We were supposed to start at 10:55. I know we're maybe a little bit late, but that's okay. I also know that we've got lunch coming up, so I want to make sure that we stay pretty much on track. You are in the session from connection to co-creation, designing globally connected learning with purpose and integrity. So if this is a session you're meant to be in, you are in the right room. This is a not explicitly AI session, so thanks for that, for coming to this. I know the AI track is very sexy, and I wish I was on that ChatGPT section right now too. But thank you for joining us here in this intercultural learning session. So I'm feeling a bit like an interloper here because I'm a faculty member, and I feel like I could learn a lot from everyone in this room as teaching and learning technologists and other media and design folks. I'm in the Department of History and Geography. I'm a human geographer, and I'm currently serving as the Intercultural Learning Scholar at our Center for Research on Global Engagement. And my kind of pet project as an Intercultural Learning Scholar at Elon is to really champion COIL VE, so Collaborative Online International Learning and Virtual Exchange at Elon. Elon really prides itself in our global learning, but we really focus a lot on in-person global learning. So we have about 80% of students on campus who study abroad at some point in their careers at Elon, whether through a one-month J-term, January term experience, or semester abroad, and that's wonderful. And I don't want COIL to be seen as a alternative or competitor to in-person study abroad, but rather thinking about COIL as an integral part of developing one's global engagement, intercultural learning that could prepare students for studying abroad or can deepen abroad experiences later in their careers. We are a relatively small crowd, so I would love just to do a really quick go-around of your name, affiliation, and what brings you to this session. Why are you interested in intercultural learning and global exchange through a technology lens? This is why I wanted that handheld mic, but maybe we could just really shout out. Is there one?
It was up there.
Okay, no problem. Maybe the folks in the back of the room could just shout out, say hello, their names, their affiliation, and what brings them to this session.
Jeremiah Shipp, Winston-Salem State University, and I know you're recording, but I didn't want to hear anything else about ChatGPT.
Okay.
Hi, Wanda White Walker, Winston-Salem State University, and we have collaboration happening with our international programs, so this caught my eye.
Dave Cooper, Elon University. I guess I agree with them. Heard a lot about ChatGPT and all that right now. Corey Trustler, University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Specifically avoiding AI sessions.
Okay.
So whatever's the other sessions, we'll go into.
Well, I consider this an alternative.
My name is Clena Smith. I'm from Virginia Tech. I don't really know what brought me to this one. I'm not specifically trying to avoid AI, but anything with collaboration interests me, so that's what for me is.
Prudence, do you want to?
Prudence Lane, Elon University. I'm here because you're leading it.
Thank you.
Sugunji, Elon University, here because I want to support you, and also like the work that you're doing around co-creation and designing with integrity.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dwani Tokrani, Elon University. I'm here because we've supported this project in some ways, so I'm excited to learn more about it more formally.
Samantha Blevins, Radford University, and I'm here because global learning, it is the thing, right? I guess the thing besides AI, but it makes it for a more richer learning environment. So.
Better thing.
I'm Mary Winfrey. I'm from Bradford University, and to my knowledge, we don't have anything like this on our campus, and so I'm interested to hear about it.
Special one gets the mic.
Tom Snedeker from Radford University, and it's kind of the same as Mary, and I'm also avoiding AI sessions as well. Even though I work in technology.
For those of you who weren't in the previous session, you want to introduce yourselves?
Yep. Todd Bucher, North Carolina State University, and I'm interested in global learning, and I actually work with our COIL folks. So yeah, I'm curious to see this.
Paul Couture, NC State. I am interested in anything that brings people together, and this is novel for me, so I'm interested.
I love that. I love bringing people together. That's one of my whys, as Kelly asked us to reflect on. As far as the why of our session today, I'm hoping to define collaborative online international learning for all of you. If you're new to this framework, it's not that innovative, it's not that new. It's been around for maybe a couple decades now. But thinking about COIL and VE and how we integrate that into global learning at our institutions. But specifically how COIL VE can really serve as a values-driven pedagogy, grounded in empathy, equity, and student voice. We tend to think of COIL VE just as in terms of digital literacy or professionalization, intercultural competency in a very kind of surface level way, but really thinking about COIL VE as almost a form of kind of global solidarity. Identifying strategies that promote co-creation, reciprocity, and critical reflection, kind of that idea of fair trade learning across global contexts. Applying ethical design principles for developing COIL projects that integrate technology use and student-centered collaboration. There are lots of equity issues to think about in terms of language, time zone, bandwidth, all those types of things. And then to reflect on how we can foster integrity and care in globally connected learning, whether it's COIL or other forms of intercultural learning. Before we get to that, I'll also admit my underlying ulterior motives, which are as a COIL champion here at Elon, I'm always trying to find venues to evangelize COIL and gain more visibility on campus. As a non-teaching and learning technologist, I'm also always looking for ideas from all of you experts, and hopefully just making some connections for those of you who either are farther ahead of us doing COIL or who are also looking to get started with COIL, and how we can share best practices and experiences. Making this a little bit interactive, I would love to get a sense of how familiar are we with COIL as a pedagogy? Are we complete beginners? We're here just to kind of find out what's going on. Maybe we just recently heard of COIL. Novice, we've heard about it. Maybe we've helped some faculty with that. Competent, maybe you've had some experience. Proficient or expert. You've maybe had some training or engaged in COIL projects before. It's such a relief when the technology is working in front of a room full of technologists. Oh, so awesome. We'll see how the rest of the presentation goes, folks. Awesome. So looks like most of us are complete beginners, maybe have some familiarity. Maybe we've got some familiarity with the tools that are used. None of us are here as COIL experts. So, phew, I feel like I'm not totally out of my depth. All right, well, let's start from ground one then, or square one, in terms of just some basic definitions of COIL. As I said, COIL is collaborative online international learning. Sometimes it's used interchangeably with VE, virtual exchange. They're different in that COIL is really about collaboration, connecting students not just to exchange perspectives and background or maybe language exchange, but really to collaborate to produce something together. Virtual exchange is still very valuable, and that can be part of COIL strategy, but so they're often paired together, but thinking of them a little bit more separately. In the nutshell, it's two instructors in two different universities, usually in two different countries, although it could be two different parts of the country, collaborating on some kind of joint project. It could be interdisciplinary. In fact, it very often is two different courses from two different disciplines. So the instructors are collaborating to co-design a learning experience for their students, and then the students likewise are collaborating on that learning experience, and it's usually about a pressing global issue. So the idea is that it's an issue that maybe touches everyone around the world, perhaps in different and uneven ways, and students can share their experiences with that issue to learn from one another. Learning goals are often, first and foremost, intercultural learning and global engagement, so to learn how to communicate across difference and collaborate across difference. This leads also to ideas of collaboration, communication, digital literacy, especially for the 21st century workplace, when most of our students are going to go off and be in careers where they're collaborating with people all over the world to bring products to market or to produce knowledge in some way using virtual tools. And also interdisciplinary problem solving, right? That all of our complex, wicked problems in the world require us to think about it through a technological lens or scientific lens or social lens, political lens, or communication, and how we can share what we're learning with others in different ways. So bringing expertise from different classrooms together. But as I said, I'm also really interested in thinking about the kind of deeper underlying values of COIL. COIL really beyond cultural competence and more of COIL as really co-creation of knowledge, and as a values-driven pedagogy. It centers student voice in that the students are really learning from one another. They're peer educators. It's not just me or my co-instructor virtually teaching them. They're learning from one another in these constructed environments and projects. They're gaining empathy from one another's different perspectives and backgrounds and contexts. It invites critical dialogue across difference, ideally, right? So they're thinking about, well, why are we having different experiences of this particular problem? What is it about our context, our country, that makes our situations different? And then it harnesses technology as a medium, I hope, for justice-oriented learning. So thinking about, again, the global scale injustices around the world, how, for example, climate change affects different countries differently, and how countries impact the environment differently. So really thinking, having students, beyond just having a one-to-one intercultural kind of learning experience, thinking about how they're situated differently in the world from their peers. So I kind of take a decolonial Ferrerian approach to thinking about COIL. So thinking about knowledge as co-creation, right? And really challenging kind of a hierarchical frameworks of knowledge where it's the expert who's there to tell you about the world, and instead they're kind of learning from the ground up. That it's problem-centered and problem-posing, so rather than just problem-solving in a very kind of technological, surface-level way, but how can we problematize the world that we live in? Cultivating critical consciousness, again, beyond just intercultural competence, but really thinking about our positionalities. Ideally, even decentering Western perspectives, especially if you're having a North-South collaboration, centering marginalized voices, right? So kind of speaking back to the frameworks that we might be familiar with. And resisting extractive learning and seeking equitable exchange. So rather than just students going to another place and, hey, teach me about your local culture, or be my guide, it's more about how can we work together, bring our mutual expertise on an equal playing field to talk about, unpack, and solve the world's pressing problems. So I'll tell you a little bit about my learning journey with COIL. Again, Kelly asked us to think about our why, so I'll tell you my why of doing COIL. So as I mentioned, I'm a human geographer. My work kind of is in the intersection of cultural and political geography. My area of specialization is the Middle East, and so it's an area where, sadly, I'm not able to bring students very often. This was one student who I did field research with in the Middle East. I've only been able to bring a few students out into the areas I work in. I've done research in Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, those areas. So areas that not a lot of parents are happy to send their children to nowadays, sadly. We lead study tours to Morocco and Turkey, which is great. But the areas where I work in, sadly, not a lot of opportunities to bring students. I'm always looking for ways to connect students to that part of the world, to demystify it, to get beyond the stereotypes and the dominant narratives, and just have students kind of see the humanity of that place. As a human geographer, though, I also really value place-based learning and having students be engaged in their local communities. So I was part of the founding, I was a founding member of the Power in Place Collaborative, which is a locally rooted oral history and digital storytelling community-based learning project that's ongoing. And we utilize technology in that, and that we're using digital tools to capture oral histories and edit stories together and share them with others. It's highly collaborative in that I'm working across campus with design thinking and media, but also with community partners, the African American Culture, Arts, and History Center, and others. And so I really learned a lot, and it challenged me a lot about collaboration and kind of, again, decentering my own perspectives and learning from experts in different knowledge fields. So it really helped prepare me, I think, for collaborative learning broadly, including COIL. And then, of course, there was COVID-19. And 2020, where we all learned about Zoom and how we transitioned on this campus from DevX to Zoom. And, but that was a real learning opportunity for me. I got to learn a lot from my colleagues and people around the world. I was engaged in a lot of kind of Zoom sessions and virtual learning environments. So it really helped me skill up and helped me to get comfortable with those virtual learning environments. And part of me really enjoyed it. And I know it's black hole for some people. They don't want to go back there. And so when I talk about virtual learning, they're like, I don't want to do that again. Like, it was such a nightmare. But to me, I learned a lot, and it opened a lot of doors for me. And so I, in 2023, was invited by colleagues in Palestine to be part of a COIL training through FIU, Florida International University. My colleagues in the West Bank, they're unable to travel very often to international conferences. They're students. It's very hard for them to get visas to travel abroad. So they're heavily invested in COIL, and they're always looking for new partners. So they invited me to be part of that. I invited a few other Elon colleagues to be part of that as well. And so I kind of first tiptoed my toes into COIL through virtual exchange during a winter term course where I was teaching my course, Middle East People in Place. I was able to connect students on a few different topics with students in the West Bank, just to hear from one another on a human level, just ask questions of what's happening and about their daily lives, just in a very kind of basic virtual exchange way. And I was pretty nervous about how that might go and how students might perceive that. And yet, when we were doing our kind of final share out and of what students, what their takeaways were, they were so eager to kind of share their experiences and how much they learned and how much their views of the world had been kind of challenged in some ways. So I thought, okay, well, this really is valuable, and students are willing and they're open-minded about this. So we went full in on implementing our COIL collaboration in the spring semesters 2024 and 25. On this, first we started with peace, justice, and strong institutions as our framework, and then we pivoted to quality education. A lot of COIL projects are centered around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because they kind of provide a universal language for development issues that face countries around the world. We landed eventually on quality education as a Sustainable Development Goal because it, in some ways, leveled the playing field. The U.S. has its own issues with quality education. There are huge inequalities in our school system. COVID revealed that. And of course, there are huge barriers to education in the West Bank. So we kind of felt like this is not an area where our students would feel like, well, we're coming from the developed world going to teach you how to develop yourselves. It's more like we actually could have a somewhat equal exchange here. So the basic framework of this was first an asynchronous week of asynchronous introductions using Padlet, where students wrote 5 words and an image that represented their values and identity. So again, not a lot of language skills needed there, but the course we were collaborating with was an advanced English class, so they were very happy to be able to use their English skills. The first synchronous virtual session was via Zoom, and we had virtual story circles in which students shared what is the story of their name, what do their names mean, what's the story of them, how did they get them, what does it mean to them. And then beforehand, they'd also filled out a cultural compass and a cultural values map, and so they kind of compared their cultural values. Things like, monotemporality. So are you really focused on being on time a lot, or are you kind of flexible with your time? And students were really, I think, surprised to find that they had a lot of cultural commonalities, despite being from very different cultural environments. And part of me thinks that's also their age, right, and their generation. They had a lot of commonalities. Then the first week was focusing on educational issues in Palestine. So the students in the West Bank, they posted either videos or written reflections about, what were their values, how were they taught to view education growing up, what were some of the most positive or impactful experiences with education they had, what were some of the most challenging or difficult experiences they had, et cetera. And then students in the US were given resources to learn about the education system in Palestine and the challenges facing students in the West Bank. And then the following week, we swapped, where students in the US read about their educational experiences, challenges they faced, impactful learning moments, and students in Palestine were learning about the education system in the US and issues that face American schools, again, such as inequalities. The issue of school shootings and violence in schools came up a lot. And it was really interesting because Palestinian students and American students weren't expecting to find a kind of common language there. And they used their critical thinking skills. They understood that the sources of violence were very different in both contexts, but there was an empathy there that, wow, both sets of students could identify with being fearful about going to school. And how did you get through that? And what are the psychological challenges that you face, and what kind of resilience? Where do you find that resilience? So that was really interesting to see an unexpected connection there. And then in sessions or weeks 4 and 5, they each chose an education-related topic to do a deeper dive into and then produce some kind of digital artifact about. And everyone kind of chose to do a Instagram story about an educational topic. So I have to have multiple images that included some kind of research background, but also voices of students or peers. And they chose a variety of topics. Some chose to compare US and Palestine related topics. Some focused just on challenges in the West Bank. Some focused just on violence in the US schools or inequality in US schools. One group chose to look at students in Palestine and Ukraine and challenges to education in the context of war. So different research topics, but each of the groups had their own output, which was this Instagram story. And then they were able to present them to the whole group in a virtual session. And then it was up to them if they chose to actually share that, those outputs or not, or if it was just kind of for internal use. And it's just some screenshots of, the first introduction was images and some words that represent your identity, and everything from really silly stuff like a raccoon riding a tricycle representing someone's identity to kind of religious or cultural symbols, and then sharing about educational experiences. And so this really helped, I think, students to, first of all, form a sense of, okay, we're all human here. This isn't something to be scared of, because students go into this pretty intimidated, but when they start to see that just even in the asynchronous introductions, okay, they're students just like us, right? And then, by the way, so Padlet's our main kind of asynchronous tool. Zoom is our main virtual synchronous tool, but then students quickly form WhatsApp groups to stay in continuous communication. We kind of leave that up to students, but that tends to be the main go-to. Students in the West Bank had been using Discord, but if you are caught with that on your phone at a checkpoint, that could be seen as really suspicious. So the students asked us to instead use WhatsApp instead. So even those kind of technology choices really have to be context aware. After each week, there was a weekly written reflection. So students first reflected on what are their expectations, their anxieties, what are they excited about, then what are their first impressions, what assumptions have been challenged. And usually that first impression is, oh wow, we have more in common than we thought. There's a kind of honeymoon period. But then what's the messy reality, right? Where are there areas to glow and grow? Where are there roses, buds, and thorns? Where are there challenges? Are there communication difficulties? Are there issues with getting members of the work to cooperate, of the group to collaborate? And then finally, a summative reflection of what they've learned, how they've changed, how they've grown, and where they go from here. We also used empathy maps after each live session, and the sessions where students were kind of sharing their experiences. So really pausing any kind of judgment and thinking, is what I'm hearing right or wrong, or do I agree or disagree? It was more like, where are the students from that I'm talking to? Who are they really? What is it that they need to do? What are they trying to achieve? What are they seeing? What are they saying about what they're seeing? What are they doing in their daily lives? What are they hearing? What are their pains and what are their gains? What are they getting out of these situations? So really just kind of analyzing it on a human level, suspending judgment, suspending, again, kind of issues of right or wrong, or do I agree or disagree? Just what's happening here. And so students in Palestine and the US filled these out after the 2 live sessions. And one of the things we did pre and post surveys and had permission to look at students' written reflections to use in a SOTL piece that we're co-authoring together. And the students in the English language class in Palestine, we were really pleased that it was not just, they talked about improving their communication skills, but it was more emphasis was on, I found my voice, or I felt empowered, or I felt like I was really changing understandings and changing representations, or changing narratives. So not just, hey, I gained better English language skills, but I was really able to show people the reality of what we were living in. I used to think my voice didn't matter. Now I know I can make a difference. We can use English to show our true image. I made new friends was another, I think, unexpected point where a lot of students, even now a year after this course, I'll run into my students and they'll say, oh yeah, I'm still texting with so-and-so. And so they really found a human connection. Students in the US also talked about finding a human connection. They talked about feeling a sense of humility and empathy, not just a kind of abstract sympathy for, the poor people over there, what they're going through, but more like, wow, okay, on a human level, I can really empathize. I understand better what you're going through. Understanding of their own privilege. A lot of students talked about, wow, I can, just wake up out of bed in my dorm room and walk to my class without any kind of fear or consideration about even if I can get to class. And so that made them reflect on their own privilege and mobility. Yeah, and students were really challenged, I think. They all of them said they came in with a certain perception that was challenged this project. And in part, they came in with a really kind of monolithic understanding of the region, of the country, and they realized, okay, wow, there's a lot of internal diversity here. There's differences of opinions, there's differences of culture, differences of experiences, and so that made them feel more confident of being able to talk about this really touchy political issue. They felt like they had a little bit of personal knowledge, and again, doesn't matter how their views or opinions may have shifted on this issue, but just that they felt a little bit more comfortable talking about it. And it also gave them a sense of responsibility, that it's not just, again, this abstract issue over there, but something that, they now have people they know in that region, and they are kind of reflecting on their own, relationality with that place. So this kind of follows a typical COIL structure where first you have maybe a week or so of icebreaker activities, could be synchronous or asynchronous. You have a couple of weeks where you're defining just the general project goals, what's the concept we're talking about, each kind of side, if you will, getting a chance to look at it and exchange a bit of information about the other, and then digging deeper into a collaborative project in weeks 4 and 5, and then a kind of final presentation, presenting the work, a summative reflection. That's the kind of sweet spot between 4 and 6 weeks. I know some courses might go for a whole half semester, 8 weeks, or even a full semester. Others, it might be really shorter term virtual exchange. But for faculty who are a little bit concerned about, well, how do I get started with this? A 4 to 6 week collaboration is really the gold standard. So even if you're starting with just a couple weeks, that's a good place to start. I would say the key ingredients for success, and this will be familiar to a lot of learning designers, is that you really want to think about your learning goals and objectives. And so making sure that both instructors have clear objectives, right? And their objectives there might be some overlapping objectives. They might have some different goals, right? My students, my goal is really for them to be able to look at the world through a different lens than just their US-centric perspectives. For my colleagues in Palestine, it was improving English language abilities. So we did have different learning goals, but we then had some shared learning goals in terms of international collaboration and intercultural competency. Having reliable and open communication, really being in touch with your co-instructor from week to week. I've also gotten a lot of wonderful support from TLT and Teaching and Learning Technologies, so having support on campus you have reliable and open communication with. Thinking about equity issues, making sure there's real collaboration. It's not just, we're using some other course, just to learn about them, but it is really on an equal playing field. Structure with some flexibility, right? We have this 4-week structure, but we do have some flexibility built in where students can bring their own questions, their own interests, their own technological preferences and expertise to the table. Really intentional intercultural reflections, though, from week to week. That's really where you're measuring that learning is happening. And at the end of the day, we weren't really that concerned if they produced an excellent, infographic for Instagram. Like, that's great if they can, but it was more about what did they learn from that process. And then again, supportive technology and logistics from a team. So I wanted to pause here and get some kind of thoughts. I've got some other kind of interactive elements of this, but I'm curious from your perspective as teaching and learning technologists and instructional designers, what are tools that come to mind when you think about student ownership? What aligns with that value of student-centered design in terms of tools and technology? how do you balance that structure versus openness, right? You want to give students the structure to be able to feel like they succeed and they're supported, but also some openness to where they can pursue their own interests. And then how do we assess co-created outcomes, right? Collaboration, any kind of group work is hard, but especially across two different institutions, maybe two different assessment styles. So I'm curious just if there are, first of all, any responses to this. So maybe we can take a minute just to share out with a partner, a little turn and talk, and then you can share out with a wider group.
I think that there has to be, a good degree of openness in the beginning particularly. And I would say that what comes next would probably be fun before you get to work. Right. You can't start with fun because that's enforced from the outside. But you can just start having informal conversations to transition to more lightness and levity, and then you transition next to the structure. And it might be good to do that every time.
I mean, I'm curious, and like the first week you said is like icebreakers and that kind of stuff.
We found that we really need icebreakers every week.
Every week.
Yeah.
Icebreakers feel contrived. Like some people are allergic to icebreakers.
Yeah.
If they feel like they're icebreakers.
Yeah.
So do you,
It was, more lighthearted or light touch, kind of get to know you questions. Yeah, right. Especially.
what are you into?
Yeah, or like if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Yeah.
Or something maybe about their favorite foods or TV programs, and so opportunities for there is an intercultural learning exchange, but also we do have a lot. There's also a lot of commonalities, and anything to get away from. We have to talk about political situation the whole time, because they're really heavy topics otherwise.
It might be good to have an opportunity to pick up with their own icebreakers.
Something that's something that we can empower to share openly, rather than being inspired and restricted.
Right from the beginning.
No, not really. I mean, I'm assuming like the icebreaker, and it's like now we're trying to do things like invite student ownership.
So, to invite student ownership, you just have to collaborate so that you're both invested.
You gotta give them something to work on.
That they both have buy-in. So, like, one of the things I would want to know as kind of like an assessment, but not an outcomes assessment, a process assessment, is do the students, do they feel ownership over the activities? And why do they just vote for it?
You're saying like kind of let them help with it.
No, the reflections.
Or let's check the effectiveness of the design to make sure that students are connected to the degree that we hope that they will. Because there's different
Modes of reflecting, right? Like, so
we want a strong foundation. We want them to continue to communicate afterward.
what was
And to continue
what
to
was
have
meaning of some topic,
resonate.
friendships,
So in order to do that, we want to optimize
context,
activities.
what it is,
So we can check the structure to make sure that it's sound with our public, because they're very different.
showcase that part, what I was saying, it's very,
And then how do we co-create outcomes?
in a way that it feels.
Well, for one class like the English language, you know, what did I learn that I didn't know before? Nobody questioned my classes. And then to the American side,
What surprised me?
So I'm hearing a lot of wonderful things, especially from this front row here, but I would love to maybe open it up a bit more to the whole group. Would our groups like to share out a little bit about some of the things they discussed? you want to share out a couple of thoughts? Okay.
Like, throw me under the bus and then back it up.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Oh. Well, we were just really talking about.
My bad.
Yeah, sorry. We were talking about, if you could say a little bit more, talking about passing the buck, about how technologies can assist with some of the logistical issues. Like when you teach or you collaborate with somebody in a war zone, or you teach with somebody in a different time zone, or you teach with students who pay for internet usage by the amount of data they're using as opposed to their American counterparts that have these unlimited plans. Help.
Great points. So how do we use accessible technologies? Anyone want to share it from this group? Everyone's like, don't get like.
So we talked about a bunch of different things, but one important thing that seemed to connect to every one of the things was the importance of having different ways to communicate, different avenues of communication with WhatsApp, which would be really informal one-on-one discussions, with more formal Padlet or the LMS, which may not be an exchange with the other students, but an exchange within your students at your university. But that seems to be key to student ownership, having those different ways to communicate with the other students, having that structure, but with openness, having those different modalities, and also assessment, giving multiple ways for students to reflect and interact. Those different modalities relate to all of these questions.
Has more to say. Go for it. And then maybe y'all, if you have lots to share out.
I just wanted to maybe Sandy or your group to think then about how our cultural ethics might affect that openness. So if you have two students or a group of students from your larger classes talking via WhatsApp, and then, there is maybe inappropriate communication on one part, there need probably to be some rules that govern those interactions. So does technology then become a barrier, or does it just really create more problems? Like, how do we navigate that?
That's a great question. Thoughts about that too. Y'all have any thoughts about things that come to mind in your conversation? Thanks, Wanda.
We kind of talk more about how to get to this kind of level at our university, because this is very impactful, but we're just touching the surface with international studies. So to get to this is like a utopia, but,
We're early days here too.
Okay. Okay.
Lots. Any other thoughts? These are really great. I'd love to hear. You guys were talking. You had a great conversation about assessment. I heard. Anything else you want to share out?
We were talking not only about assessing co-created outcomes, but assessing the structure itself to make sure that the students were engaged, felt like they were a part of the process, because if you want to drive student ownership, it's not just going to be the tools that does it, but the structure that they're going to be communicating within. So to give them voice, I think would enhance buy-in, and I think that the instructors might learn something too.
So if we're giving student voice, then again, how are we creating those multiple modalities for them to express themselves and what they're learning or issues they're having? So we did try to do ongoing assessment. So there was short surveys after each Zoom session where they would kind of assess how did their breakout rooms go? Was everyone talking? Every session they had two conversation facilitators. How do you think they did? What issues came up? Just to kind of make sure that the those Zoom sessions were working well. The two instructors, we would go into the breakout rooms, of course, and engage with students there. So we had our own kind of visual assessment and being able to observe what was happening. Then there was also the week-to-week reflections. Those were individual reflections to their instructors, so students could feel a bit more empowered to be honest about issues they were having, so we were able to address issues as they came up. In terms of technology use, so I mentioned you have to be aware of privacy and security issues, and again, that's where teaching and learning technologies support staff can really help. Being aware of Discord having issues in certain countries. Certain countries, some platforms will be banned, for example. Making sure that you're choosing low bandwidth tools, right? So Padlet doesn't take a lot of bandwidth, Zoom does, so are we okay with cameras off? Is that going to be okay? Or if even that is going to be a problem, and you also have time zone differences, designing completely asynchronous learning, where you're maybe sending voice memos to each other or written messages. If there's language, equity issues, English is kind of the default international language in a lot of COIL projects. We tried to at least not balance the playing field, but every week the students in Palestine would teach new phrases in local colloquial Arabic to our students, so they got a sense of what it feels like to be a language learner themselves. We also found we really had to do icebreakers every week, pretty much give them a lighthearted question to engage in that in some ways would, again, create trust and rapport, but also a bit of intercultural learning. Again, because otherwise the topic and subject matter could be heavy, so really making sure that community building is woven throughout. I know we're about at time. Again, these were wonderful thoughts and observations. I'd love to continue the conversation. Maybe we can post, or I can share. I'm happy to share the slides with others. Here are some examples of COIL projects, again, from multiple different disciplines, oftentimes like working across differences and across disciplines. I really encourage anyone across campus to think about how they can infuse global learning into their classrooms, regardless of the discipline or their background. One of my favorite examples is a interdisciplinary project between a Salem State in Massachusetts and a college in Mexico. There was art historians and environmental scientists collaborating together, and their project was, over a course of several weeks, students collected their trash, and they took photos of every single piece of trash that they produced throughout their week. And then they compared what are they consuming, what are they disposing of, and so they can kind of compare what the two different countries and cultures, what are they producing in terms of waste. And then they were analyzing that, and then they took the pictures of the trash that they had produced and had to create some kind of collaborative digital art piece together. And so this is one example where the students, using the trash from different countries, produced these kind of sea turtles. Another group, they produced cityscapes of their respective cities and kind of compared the colors of the cities, but also the colors of the waste they were producing. So really interesting cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural collaboration. I had a little tool for a mini design sprint if we had time, but you were all so great and interactive. But this is something that you can take away if you'd like. And I've also I handed out the kind of physical copies of this. This is a values-centered design framework to thinking first and foremost about not only what are your learning goals, but what are your learning values in terms of student-centeredness, student voice, equity, and how are those driving each phase of the COIL process, from connection to ongoing collaboration and discussion to final co-creation of a product. So thinking again about values, process, technology. So your learning goals, but also values are driving technology choices, evidence of learning at every stage, and then what are your anticipated challenges or equity issues. Again, I'm happy to share the digital tool, and you also have a handout there. More resources for folks. There's an online ebook, Collaborative Online Learning and Global Engagement, Wiley Handbook. There's a whole section of that which has a lot of different case studies, which are great. University of Texas at Dallas has a project archive of past COIL projects. UNC Global Affairs also has an archive. AAC and UVE COIL Initiative That is, we are now at Elon, myself, I'm working with Becky as part of a AEC&U Fulbright Global Challenges Teaching Award. And they've got a lot of wonderful resources at AEC&U on VE COIL, including rubrics. You can use values rubrics. SUNY COIL and COIL Connect Virtual Exchange are clearinghouses where you can find resources, but also find partners. And feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions about getting started with COIL. And I think we're a little bit over, but thank you all for coming and participating in this session. Really appreciate it.